Hello everyone, in today's video I will be narrating stories that I found off of Reddit. If you enjoyed this video, make sure you subscribe to my channel, like this video, and comment something down below. But without further ado,
let's get straight into these stories.
I live in a city where there's a massive, half-abandoned shopping mall. It used to be the place to go in the 90 seconds, but over the years, stores shut down, new ones never moved in, and now only a handful of businesses still operate in one wing. The rest of the mall is a ghost town, gated storefronts, flickering emergency lights, and empty corridors leading to nowhere. Security mostly ignores the abandoned areas. One night, after a particularly bad rainstorm, I found myself there by accident. The bus I was on broke down a few blocks away, and the only place nearby to wait for my ride was the mall. The open section was closed for the night, but the main doors were unlocked, probably left that way for janitors or security. Inside, the air was humid, thick with the smell of damp carpet and mildew. The storm had knocked out some of the lights, leaving long stretches of darkness ahead of me. That's when I heard it, a soft splashing. I turned a corner and saw a massive puddle stretching across the tiled floor. Rain must have leaked through the roof, collecting into murky pools. But what made me stop wasn't the water, it was the man standing in the middle of it. He was barefoot, wearing an old, tattered suit that clung to his frame as if he had been caught in the rain for hours. His head was tilted slightly as if he were listening for something, and he was smiling, not at me, not exactly, just smiling. His eyes were closed, and his hands twitched at his sides like he was counting something only he could hear. I took a step back, and the movement must have caught his attention because his head snapped toward me, eyes still closed. Then, very softly, he said, "The water remembers you." I didn't stay to find out what that meant. I turned and walked, fast, but not running, because some deep, primal part of me knew that running would be the wrong choice. I kept my steps even, steady, like I was just another late night employee who had seen nothing unusual. I reached the exit, pushed the doors open, and stepped outside into the fresh, rain-soaked air. When I turned back to look through the glass doors, the puddle was still there, but the man was gone. I told myself I imagined it, stress, bad lighting, too much horror movie logic filling in the blanks. That was what I wanted to believe, but things started happening after that night. The first time, I was stepping into my apartment after work. It had rained earlier, the streets still slick and glistening under the streetlights. As I took off my shoes, I noticed something odd. My socks were wet. I had been wearing boots, waterproof boots. I frowned, peeled them off, and stared at my feet. The socks were soaked, but not just from water. They had a faint smell to them, something stagnant, like old rainwater left to sit too long in a basement. The next time, I woke up in the middle of the night to the sound of dripping, not the soft tick of a leaky faucet. This was heavier, like water slapping against tile. I sat up, heart pounding, and turned on my bedside lamp. The sound stopped immediately, but when I swung my legs over the bed, my foot landed in a puddle. The carpet beneath me was soaked. I jumped up, cursing, and flipped on the overhead light. The water was real. There was no leak, no spilled cup, nothing that should have made a puddle that size. It stretched from my bedside to the door, dark, murky, and smelling faintly of mildew. I cleaned it up, trying to ignore the creepy unease in my gut. I even called maintenance the next day, but they found nothing. No pipe issues, no leaks, no reason why my floor had been wet in the middle of the night. And then the dream started. I was back in the mall, the abandoned section where the water had pooled across the floor. In the dream, it was always raining inside, water dripping from a ceiling too high to see. And he was there, the man in the suit. He never moved. He just stood in the center of the water, smiling that same not quite right smile. His head tilted like he was listening to something I couldn't hear. Except, in the dream, I could hear it. The water, it whispered. I never remembered the words when I woke up, only the feeling, something pressing against the edges of my thoughts, waiting for me to let it in. I started sleeping with the TV on, anything to drown out the silence. But no matter what, I woke up to wet floors, damp clothes, and the vague, creeping sense that the water was following me. Then, about a week after the first dream, I saw him again. Not at the mall, not in my apartment, but in my reflection. It was raining that day, just a light drizzle. I was walking past a shop window when I glanced at the glass and froze. There, in the reflection of the street behind me, stood the man in the suit, soaking wet, smiling. I spun around. No one was there, but when I looked back at the glass, I saw him again, closer this time. That was the moment I knew he wasn't just a hallucination, or a dream, or a trick of the light. He was real, and he was getting closer. I don't go out in the rain anymore, not without an umbrella, not without layers. But sometimes, even when it's dry, I hear the sound of water splashing just behind me. I don't know how to make it stop. I've done everything, moved apartments, stopped walking near reflective surfaces, even avoided places with water altogether. But it doesn't matter. He's still with me. day. I learned that the hard way last week. It hadn't rained in days, and I was starting to hope that maybe, just maybe, it was over. I could sleep through the night, my floors were dry, and I hadn't seen him in any windows or mirrors. For the first time in months, I felt normal. Then, I got a call from an unknown number. At first, I ignored it. Who answers unknown numbers anymore? But they called again, and again. By the third time, I felt this gnawing sense of dread in my gut. I picked up. For a few seconds, all I heard was static. Then, that horrible wet sound. Drip, 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 and a voice, low, distorted, like someone speaking underwater. The water remembers you. I threw my phone across the room. When I picked it up again, the call was gone. No record of it in my history. No way to call back. Not that I would have dared. That night, I dreamed of the mall again. But this time, I wasn't just watching him. I was in the water. It came up to my knees, then my waist. It was warm, thick, like floodwater that had been left to stagnate for weeks. The man in the suit stood across from me, his head tilted at that unnatural angle, smiling. And then, he opened his eyes. They were pitch black. Not just the pupils, the whole eye, as if they had been filled with ink. And I swear, I started sinking. The water around me pulled, tugged, dragged at my clothes and skin like it wanted me under. I struggled, but my limbs felt slow, heavy. The man took a step closer. I wanted to scream, but the water was already lapping at my chin. And then I woke up, except I wasn't in my bed. I was on the floor, soaked. My clothes, my sheets, the entire room, everything was wet. And the smell, that awful, mildew-stained, rotty rain smell filled the air. I gasped for breath, my lungs burning, my mind reeling. Hell. I don't know what's happening to me anymore. I don't know if I'm awake, if I'm dreaming, if there's even a difference. All I know is that every night, I dream of that mall. I take the train home every night from my shift at a late night cafe. It's a quiet ride, 3 stops, always around 1:30 a.m. Just me and the occasional drunk or half asleep commuter. But last Tuesday, I noticed something I hadn't before. The last car was always empty, not just sparsely populated, completely, utterly empty. At first, I didn't think much of it. Maybe it was just an unpopular car, maybe people preferred the ones closer to the exits. But then, on a whim, I decided to sit in it. Big mistake. As soon as I stepped in, the air changed. It wasn't just colder, it felt wrong, like stepping into a space that wasn't meant to be occupied. The doors slid shut behind me with a finality that sent a shiver down my spine. I was alone, at least I thought I was. The train rumbled forward, and I settled into my seat near the middle of the car, scrolling through my phone. That's when I noticed the reflection in the window across from me. There was someone sitting in the row behind me. I froze. I hadn't heard anyone get on. Slowly, without turning my head, I tilted my phone camera upward, trying to catch a glimpse. My hands were shaking as I angled it just right. Nothing. My camera showed an empty seat, but the window reflection still showed the figure. It was hunched forward, its head tilted unnaturally as if it was watching me. I tried to breathe evenly, telling myself it was a trick of the glass, some weird lighting thing. But then it moved. Not just a shift, not just a trick of my eyes. The head snapped up, as if it had just noticed I was looking. I shot out of my seat so fast I nearly tripped over myself. The next car was just a few steps away. I bolted, slamming the button to open the doors, but they didn't budge. My heart pounded in my ears as I turned back toward the reflection. The seat behind me was empty, but now the reflection was mine. I was the one sitting there, hunched, watching an empty car. The train screeched to a halt at my stop, and the doors finally opened. I don't remember running home, but somehow I made it back. I didn't sleep that night. I've taken the same train every night since. But now, I sit in the second to last car, and every time we pass through a tunnel, I glance toward the last car's reflection in the windows. It's still empty. I told myself I was imagining things. Stress, exhaustion, maybe even some weird optical illusion. But as the nights passed, the unease never faded. Each time I rode the train, I couldn't stop myself from glancing at the last car's reflection. And each time, I saw it. But not in my actual seat, not in the car I was in, but sitting alone in the last car, always staring forward, perfectly still. I tested it once. On Friday, I waved my hand in front of my face, made a fist, even leaned to one side in my seat. The reflection didn't move. The me in the last car sat there, head slightly tilted, hands resting in its lap. It wasn't my reflection, it was something else. That night, I barely slept. I kept the lights on, the curtains closed, but every time I closed my eyes, I saw that other version of me sitting alone in the last car, staring ahead with that blank, unmoving posture. Saturday, I decided not to take the train home. I took an Uber instead. I watched the city blur by through the window, trying to shake the feeling of something pressing at the edges of my mind. I told myself it was over. It wasn't. I don't remember falling asleep that night, but I remember waking up. up to the sound of train doors sliding open. I shot upright in bed, heart pounding. My room was dark, but for a split second, I swore I saw it. Gleaming metal doors, yellow fluorescent lights, the empty seats of a train car stretching endlessly into the void, and my own reflection in the window across from me. I stayed up the rest of the night, shaking, the sound of those doors still ringing in my ears. Sunday came and went in a blur. I ignored my phone, didn't turn on the TV, barely ate. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. That night, I checked the train schedule. I knew I shouldn't, but I had to. 1:30 a.m. I stood on the platform, arms crossed, heart hammering. The train arrived right on time, its headlights cutting through the empty station. The doors slid open, and for the first time in days, I stepped onto the train. This time, I didn't even glance at the last car. I went straight to my usual seat in the second to last, hands gripping my knees, eyes locked on the floor. The train rumbled forward, and then I heard it. A shuffle, a single, soft movement from behind me. The last car was empty. I knew it was empty. I forced myself to breathe, staring straight ahead. Maybe I imagined it. Maybe I was losing it. Then came another sound, a breath, right behind my ear. I turned so fast I nearly fell out of my seat, but there was nothing. Nothing but the empty, dimly lit train, and the last car's reflection in the window. My reflection, but this time, it wasn't sitting still. It was standing, closer to the window than before, closer to me. The train slowed, pulling into my stop. I didn't wait for it to come to a full halt. I bolted, stumbling onto the platform, my pulse roaring in my ears. The doors hissed shut behind me. As the train pulled away, I made the mistake of looking up. The last car's window was dark, almost too dark to see inside, but just before the train disappeared into the tunnel, I swore I saw it. A face, my face, staring at me and smiling. I haven't taken the train since. I walk home now, even if it takes me twice as long, but I can't shake the feeling that I made a mistake, that I left something behind. I didn't sleep that night. Every shadow in my apartment felt stretched wrong, too still, like something was lurking just outside my vision. The reflection in my bathroom mirror unsettled me in a way I couldn't explain. I stopped looking at mirrors altogether. By Monday, I convinced myself I was overreacting. A bad week, exhaustion, maybe even sleep paralysis. I told myself I'd been watching too many horror videos online, that my mind was playing tricks on me. Then, my phone rang. I didn't recognize the number. Normally, I wouldn't have answered, but something told me to pick up. I hesitated, then pressed accept. At first, there was silence. No static, no background noise. Just a deep, empty void stretching on for too long. Then, finally, why did you leave? My own voice whispered. I hung up so fast my hand shook. The call history showed no record of it. I turned my phone off and shoved it into a drawer, trying to steady my breathing. I wasn't going crazy. I wasn't. I decided to go for a walk, clear my head. The city felt quieter than usual, even though people were out. Their faces blurred past me, indistinct, like I was walking through a dream. And then I saw it, across the street, standing at the entrance to the subway station. Not someone who looked like me. The same clothes, same hair, same expressionless stare. I stabbed cold. It didn't move, didn't blink, just stood there, watching me. A bus rumbled by, blocking my view for a split second. When it passed, it was gone. I stumbled back a step, breath coming fast and uneven. I turned, almost running back toward my apartment. I needed to lock my door, shut my blinds, do something. But as I reached my building and fumbled for my keys, I noticed something that made my stomach drop. My door was already unlocked. I knew for a fact I had locked it before leaving. I pushed it open slowly, the air inside stale and unmoving. The apartment was silent, too silent. Every instinct screamed at me to leave, run, but my feet carried me forward. My bedroom door was slightly ajar, just enough for me to see inside, and there, standing in front of my mirror, was May. Its back was to me, but I knew. Its shoulders rose and fell with slow, deliberate breaths. I couldn't move, couldn't blink. Then it turned its head, not its body, just its head, too far. Bones should have been like that. It smiled, the same, too wide smile I had seen in the last train car. You left me behind. I ran. I don't remember how I got out, or how long I ran, but I didn't stop until I reached a motel on the other side of the city. I paid in cash. I didn't tell anyone where I was. I stayed there for 3 days, afraid to check my phone, afraid to look at my own reflection. By the time I finally returned to my apartment, the door was locked. Everything was as I had left it, but the air inside felt wrong. I didn't check the mirror. I didn't want to. I packed a bag that night, moved across town, found a new job, closer to home. I never took the train again, but sometimes, in the middle of the night, I wake up with the feeling that something is watching me, and the mirrors in my new apartment, I keep them all covered, because once, just once, I made the mistake of peeking, and in the reflection, standing behind me, was May, smiling. I work as a janitor at a mid-sized university, and while it's mostly quiet, there are nights when things feel off. One evening, I was finishing up my rounds at the student union building. It was almost midnight, and I was the only one left inside. As usual, I checked the lost and found before locking up. People leave all kinds of weird things behind: scarves, water bottles, even a single shoe once. But that night, there was something new. A doll. It was small, maybe a foot tall, with glassy eyes and tangled brown hair. It wasn't the cheap plastic kind you find at a toy store. This one looked antique, like it belonged in a museum. Its dress was faded blue, and its porcelain hands had tiny cracks, like spider webs. I don't know why, but the sight of it sitting in the bin unsettled me. Maybe it was the way it was positioned, propped up perfectly as if someone had placed it there with care. I shrugged it off. If some student probably left it behind as a prank or a weird art project. I closed the lost and found cabinet and went about my work. A half hour later, I walked past the cabinet again on my way to the exit. The door was slightly open. I knew I had shut it. I felt a cold prickle run down my back. Trying to ignore it, I reached out and swung the door fully open. The doll was gone. I froze. The bin was still there, untouched. Nothing else had been moved. Just the doll. I slowly turned, scanning the empty lounge area. The furniture cast long shadows under the dim emergency lights. The building was silent except for the faint hum of the air vents. Then I heard it. A soft tap, tap, tap on the tiled floor behind me. I turned sharply, my breath catching in my throat. Nothing. Just an empty hallway. I don't know what I expected to see, but I sure as hell didn't expect to see the doll. Standing upright on the floor near the front desk. My stomach twisted. It hadn't been there before. I was sure of it. I took a step back. The doll's head was tilted slightly, its glass eyes reflecting the dim light. I don't know what came over me, but I wasn't about to play whatever game was happening. I grabbed my keys, locked up without finishing my rounds, and bolted. The next morning, I came in early, telling myself it was just exhaustion messing with me. Maybe I had imagined it. Maybe I had knocked the doll over without realizing it. But when I checked the lost and found bin, the doll was back inside, sitting perfectly upright, exactly where I had first found it. I transferred to another building the next week. A week passed, and I tried to push the whole thing out of my mind. I was working in the science building now, far from the student union, and I figured that was the end of it. Then, late one night, as I was mopping the hallway near the physics labs, my radio crackled. Hey, you're around? It was Mark, the new janitor who had taken over my old building. I clicked my radio. Yeah, what's up? There was a pause. Then, in a lower tone, he said, did you ever see something weird in the lost and found? My stomach dropped. Why? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. I found this doll in there earlier. Thought it was just some kid's toy, but I just walked by the cabinet again, and it was sitting on the front desk. A lump formed in my throat. Mark, listen to me. Lock the building and get out. Now, another pause. Then, wait, what the hell? I swear, I just put it back, but a sudden burst of static cut him off. I grabbed my keys and ran. I wasn't about to leave him in there alone. By the time I reached the student union, the front doors were locked. I banged on them, shouting for Mark, but got no response. My gut twisted. He should have been right near the entrance. Then, through the glass, I saw something move. Not Mark, the doll. It was sitting in the middle of the lobby floor, facing the door. I fumbled with my keys, but my hands were shaking too badly to get the right one. My breath came out in short, panicked bursts. Then I saw Mark. He was standing at the far end of the lobby, frozen in place. His face was pale, his eyes locked on the doll. I pounded on the door. Mark, get out of there. He didn't move. Then, slowly, jerkily, he turned his head toward me and smiled. Not a normal smile. His lips stretched too wide, his teeth clenched together like he was forcing in. His eyes, though, they weren't smiling at all. They were terrified. Then, without breaking eye contact, he bent down, picked up the doll, and cradled it in his arms like a child. I don't remember running. I don't remember getting back to my car, but I remember watching from a distance as Mark, still clutching the doll, slowly unlocked the door from the inside and stepped out. He walked past me without a word. They kept walking, right out of the parking lot, right down the street, into the dark. The next day, Mark didn't show up for work. No one ever saw him again. The lost and found was empty when they checked it, but 2 nights later, I drove past the student union, and through the window, just for a second, I saw something sitting on the front desk. A small, antique doll. I don't go near the student union anymore. Even now, months later, I take the long way around campus just to avoid walking past the building at night. But the thing is, I still see it sometimes. The doll. At first, it was only when I passed by the union, a quick glimpse through the glass, barely a flicker in my peripheral vision. A tiny figure perched on the desk, facing the door as if it was waiting. Then it started showing up in other places. One night, I was taking out the trash behind the science building when I spotted something at the far end of the loading dock. A small silhouette, just barely illuminated by the security lights. My heart stuttered. It wasn't there when I walked in, but now it was. The doll, sitting upright, face up. I dropped the trash bag and bolted inside, slamming the door shut behind me. I didn't sleep that night. After that, I started seeing it more often. A quick glance through a window, and there it was, on a table inside an empty classroom. I'd pass an open office door, and for a split second, I'd catch a glimpse of something small and unmoving in the shadows before the light flickered, and it was gone. It was following me. I tried to tell myself it was just paranoia, that maybe someone else had found the doll and was moving it around, some kind of elaborate prank. But then I started seeing Mark, or at least, I think it was him. The first time was outside the dorms. I was cutting through the courtyard when I saw a figure standing by the fence, just beyond the glow of the streetlights. Something about the posture felt wrong. I stopped. The figure stepped forward, just enough for the light to hit its face. Lark, but not Mark. His eyes were too wide. His skin was pale and stretched too tight over his cheekbones, like a wax figure that had melted slightly. His lips were parted in that same too wide smile, and in his arms, cradled like a child, was the doll. I read. I didn't look back. That was 2 weeks ago. Now, I don't just see the doll. I hear it. Soft taps on the floor when I'm alone in a hallway, a faint rustling behind me when I'm locking up, and at night, when I'm finally home, I hear something even worse. A whispery voice coming from inside my apartment. Not words, just a soft, sing-song murmur. A child's voice giggling. The first time it happened, I spent the night at a friend's place, but when I came back the next day, my apartment was different. Nothing was missing. Nothing was out of place, except on my kitchen table there was something new. A small, antique doll, sitting upright, face up, watching. I haven't been home since. I don't think I can go back, but the thing is, I don't think it matters, because tonight, while I was sitting in my car at a gas station, trying to figure out what to do next, I looked up at the convenience store window, and reflected in the glass, standing just behind me, was Mark, and he was holding the doll. I used to work in a hospital, not as a doctor or nurse, but in it. The job mostly involved troubleshooting computers, fixing printers, and setting up accounts. Nothing glamorous. The one perk was that the hospital had a break room tucked away on the 3rd floor that almost no one used. It had the best vending machine in the building, always stocked with my favorite snacks. The weird thing, it never took my money. Every time I slid a bill in, it spat it back out. When I tried using coins, they'd clatter into the return slot. I figured it was broken, but when I pressed a button for a snack, the machine would hum, and out came whatever I wanted. Free food. I wasn't about to complain. For months, I used that vending machine exclusively. No one else seemed to notice it. I even asked a coworker once if they'd ever tried it. Oh, that old thing, he said, frowning. That machine's been out of order for years. I laughed it off, but something about the way he said it bugged me. That night, curiosity got the better of me. I decided to check the machine again, but this time, I brought a flashlight. I expected dust, maybe some loose wires. But when I crouched down to look into the dispensing slot, I saw something else. Eyes, just for a second, too wide, glassy eyes staring back at me from deep inside the machine. I stumbled backward, hard hammering. The vending machine worked. A bag of chips tumbled into the slot. I didn't touch it. I didn't touch anything. The next day, I took the long way around to avoid the break room. By the end of the week, maintenance had removed the vending machine entirely. No one could tell me where it had gone. I tried to forget about it. Really, I did. But some things refused to be forgotten. A few weeks after the vending machine disappeared, I was called up to the 5th floor to fix a doctor's workstation. The 5th floor was mostly administration, a quiet place compared to the rest of the hospital. As I worked, I'd overheard 2 nurses chatting in the hallway. They finally replaced that vending machine in the break room. One of them said, "My stomach twisted. About time." The other replied, "The old one creeped me out. You know, no one ever refilled it, but it always had snacks." I felt a chill crawl up my spine. I had never seen anyone restock the machine on the 3rd floor either. I finished my task quickly and left, but curiosity got the better of me again. I took a detour to the 5th floor break room, and there it was. The vending machine looked identical to the one that had been removed. Same scuffed edges, same slightly flickery panel light. My breath hitched when I saw the keypad. It had the same small crack in the number 7 button. It was the same machine. I took a step back. Someone walked past me and casually inserted a dollar bill. This time, the machine took the money. They were ordinary, but when the snack dropped, I swear I saw something shift in the dark slot beneath it. A glint, a reflection in eyes. I turned and left without saying a word. That night, I had a dream. I was standing in front of the vending machine, but the buttons were gone. The display screen flickered, and instead of a price, it showed a message. I said you. I woke up in a cold sweat. The next day, I asked around, trying to find out where the old vending machine had gone before it ended up on the 5th floor. Nobody seemed to know. One of the janitors said something about a basement storage room, but when I checked, it was empty. That was months ago. I avoid vending machines now, just just in case. But sometimes, when I pass one in a quiet hallway, I swear I hear a faint humming sound, like something inside is waiting for me to look too closely again. I told myself I was done with this, that it was just my imagination, a combination of stress and too much time spent in dimly lit hospital corridors. But then, last week, something happened. I was working late, just one last ticket before I could head home. A doctor's computer on the 4th floor had frozen, and I needed to restart the system. I finished in under 10 minutes, but as I packed up my tools, I heard it, a low, mechanical hum. I turned my head slowly. At the end of the hallway, just outside a darkened break room, stood a vending machine. I didn't want to look, but my body moved on its own. My feet carried me closer, as if drawn by an unseen force. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, flickering slightly, casting long shadows against the walls. It was the vending machine. It had moved again. I swallowed hard and forced myself to walk past it, staring straight ahead, refusing to acknowledge it. But as I did, something changed. The hum stopped, and then a click, the sound of something dropping into the collection slot. I should have kept walking. I should have ignored it, but my hands were already moving, reaching down before I could stop myself. The vending machine had dispensed something, but it wasn't a bag of chips. It wasn't candy or a soda bottle. It was a small, folded piece of paper. My fingers trembled as I picked it up. The paper was old, yellowed at the edges, the ink slightly smudged. There was a message scrawled in shaky handwriting. "Help me." I dropped it like it had burned me. My heart pounded in my chest. I stepped back, breath coming in short gasps. That's when I heard it. A faint, whispering voice. So quiet I almost missed it. But there, beneath the hum of the vending machine, beneath the buzzy lights and the distant beeping of hospital monitors, still hungry, I read. I didn't care if I looked crazy. I sprinted down the hallway, through the stairwell, out into the cold night air. I didn't stop until I reached my car, hands shaking as I fumbled for my keys. I called in sick the next day, and the next. When I finally went back, the vending machine was gone. I asked around, casually, pretending I was just wondering where to get a snack. A few nurses shrugged and said they hadn't noticed it had disappeared. One even insisted there had never been a vending machine on the 4th floor, but I knew what I saw. I was shopping for a new jacket at a department store in the mall, not a big, fancy mall, just one of those slowly dying ones where half the stores are closed and the food court is mostly empty. It was early evening, maybe an hour before closing, and the place was quiet. The only sounds were the distant hum of the escalators and the occasional crackle of the store's overhead announcements. After picking out a few jackets, I made my way to the fitting rooms. There was no attendant, just a row of small cubicles with full-length mirrors on the inside and a communal mirror outside. The hallway leading to the rooms was dimly lit, the flickering fluorescent light giving everything a dull, yellow glow. I pushed open the first empty stall I saw and stepped inside, locking the door behind me. The space was cramped but normal, 3 walls, a bench, and the mirror. I tried on the first jacket, checking the fit when I heard it. Breathing out my oath. It was slow, deliberate, almost thoughtful. I froze, staring at my reflection. It was coming from the fitting room next to mine. The stalls weren't soundproof, of course, but this was too close. Like someone was pressing their face against the thin wall, listening. I waited, thinking maybe I was imagining it, but then there was a soft, barely perceptible tap, tap, tap against the shared wall. Nope, not my imagination. I cleared my throat loudly, as if to remind whoever was there that I was, too. The tapping stopped. I hurried through trying on the last 2 jackets, suddenly eager to leave. Just as I was about to take off the final one, a voice, low and almost amused, murmured from the other side, "That one suits you." I bit cold. I hadn't spoken. I hadn't made a sound since I cleared my throat, and the voice was too deep, too close. I didn't reply. I just yanked off the jacket, threw on my own, and grabbed my things. When I unlocked the door and stepped out, I expected to see someone emerging from the stall next to mine, but the door was open. The room was empty. I stared for a moment, trying to make sense of it. There was nowhere to go, no back exit, no way someone could have slipped out without me noticing. I stepped toward the stall, half expecting to see a hole in the wall or something, but there was nothing. Just a small, empty room. I left the store without buying anything. Now, I know what you're thinking. Maybe someone was playing a prank, or I just imagined it. I told myself the same thing at first, but here's the thing. I went back a week later out of morbid curiosity. The fitting rooms were under renovation. When I asked an employee about it, she frowned and said, "Oh yeah, that section's been closed off for months. Leaks in the walls or something. We haven't used those rooms in a while." I didn't ask any more questions. I just left. After that last visit to the department store, I swore I wouldn't go back. Let some things stick with you whether you want them to or not. I kept replaying that night in my head. The voice, the tapping, the way the stall next to mine had been empty. The logical part of me wanted to dismiss it, to chalk it up to exhaustion, stress, or some kind of trick of the acoustics in that newly abandoned store. But the logical part of me wasn't the one waking up at 3 a.m., staring at my closet door, remembering the way that voice had whispered, "That one suits you." I couldn't let it go, so against my better judgment, I decided to look into it. A few nights after my second visit, I went online and started digging. I searched for anything related to the store, old crime reports, urban legends, forum posts. It took hours, but eventually I found something. A post buried in a local history forum. It was from an ex-employee talking about how the store had undergone multiple renovations over the years, but certain areas were always avoided. The fitting rooms, in particular, had a weird reputation. Employees complained of cold spots, of eerie footsteps when no one was there, of racks of clothing shifting on their own. Then there was this. Back in the late 90s, there was an incident. A man was found in one of the fitting rooms after closing. Security footage showed him going in, but never coming out. No exit, no explanation. Just gone. They checked the tapes 100 times. The stall was empty when they opened it, but employees swear they still hear breathing behind the walls. I stared at the post for a long time. The rational part of me wanted to call it nonsense. The rest of me knew better. I should have stopped there, but I didn't. A week later, I went back to the mall. Not inside the store, just the parking lot. I sat in my car and watched. It was late, maybe 10:30 p.m. The store was already closed, lights dim, only a few cars left in the lot. I kept telling myself I'd leave in 5 minutes. Then I saw something, a shape moving past the front windows of the store. At first, I thought it was a security guard, but something was off. The movement was wrong, not steady, not purposeful, more like a flicker, like whatever I was seeing was glitching, appearing for a second, then vanishing. Then, just as quickly, it was gone. I left immediately. That night, I woke up to a noise in my apartment, a soft, slow tap, 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 not on my door, not on my window, on my closet wall. I didn't move. I barely breathed. I just lay there, part hammering in my chest. Then, so quiet I almost convinced myself I was imagining it, I heard the voice. "That one suits you." I don't remember the next few minutes, just that I turned every light on in my apartment and didn't sleep until the sun came up. I moved out 2 weeks later. I don't know what happened that night in the fitting room. I don't know what I saw in the mall or how it followed me home, but I do know this. Some things stay with you. I thought movie would fix things. New apartment, new neighborhood, fresh start, but you can't outrun something that doesn't walk. The first month in my new place was uneventful. No tapping, no whispers, no shadows moving where they shouldn't. I started convincing myself that maybe, just maybe, it was all in my head. Then, one night, my phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. "That one suits you." I felt my stomach drop. I didn't respond. I just stared at the screen until my phone dimmed. The words burned into my brain. Maybe it was a prank. Maybe someone had overheard me at the store, saw me freak out, decided to mess with me. But then, my closet door creaked open, slowly, almost like it was being pulled from the inside. I didn't move. I just watched as the dark gap widened. The air in my room felt wrong, thick and humming like the silence right before a storm. Then, a shape moved inside. I didn't wait. I grabbed my keys, bolted out of my apartment, and didn't stop running until I was in my car with the doors locked. I called my friend Devin. He's the kind of guy who loves paranormal crap, urban legends, ghost hunting, all of it. He picked up on the second ring. "Dude, it's almost midnight. I need your help," I said, my voice shaking. Yeah. An hour later, I was at Devin's place, sitting on his couch, telling him everything. He didn't laugh. He didn't call me crazy. He just listened, rubbing his chin like he was piecing something together. When I was done, he leaned back and exhaled. "You know what this sounds like," he said. "You latch on, or what? Something at that store latched onto you. Probably wasn't even human to begin with. Might have been using that place as a hunting ground." He paused. "And now it's following you." I swallowed hard. "So how do I get rid of it?" His expression darkened. "Don't acknowledge it. Don't respond. Don't give it a reason to think you're still paying attention. If you do, it'll keep coming back." For the next few nights, I did everything I could to ignore it. The tapping started up again. I didn't react. My phone buzzed with another unknown text. I deleted it without reading. My closet door creaked open. Every night at 3 a.m. I faced the other way and kept my eyes shut. Then, one night, I woke up with an overwhelming feeling that I wasn't alone. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. But I felt it. Something standing at the foot of my bed, watching. The air was freezing. My skin prickled. My body screaming at me to run. But I forced myself to do nothing. After what felt like an eternity, the presence faded. The room warmed. My heartbeat slowed. And then, Then, just as I was about to let myself believe it was over, a whisper inches from my ear. I know you're awake. I don't remember much after that. I must have blacked out, because when I opened my eyes, it was morning and I was alone. The tapping stopped after that night. No more texts, no more shadows in my closet. But I never go shopping alone anymore, and I never ever step into a fitting room, because deep down, I know it's still out there. I work as a flight attendant for a regional airline, nothing glamorous, just short-haul flights between cities. It's mostly routine, serving drinks, ensuring seatbelts are fastened, dealing with the occasional unruly passenger. But one flight still haunts me. It was a red-eye. A last-minute scheduling change had me covering for a sick coworker. The plane was only about a quarter full, mostly exhausted business travelers, a few college kids, and a woman with a sleeping toddler. We were scheduled for a smooth 2-hour flight. Takeoff was uneventful, and after reaching cruising altitude, I did my usual rounds. As I reached the back of the plane, I noticed something odd. A single tray table was down in an empty row near the rear. I could have sworn it was up during takeoff. I gently pushed it back into place and continued. Half an hour later, while collecting trash, I passed by the row again. The tray table was down again and looked around. The nearest occupied seat was a few rows ahead. No one could have done it without me noticing. I secured it once more, making sure it locked into place, and walked away. A little later, the call button from the back row dinged. I sighed, assuming it was a tech glitch. That happens sometimes, but when I got there, my stomach dropped. The call button light was on for an empty seat, the same one with the tray table issue. I reached up to turn it off when, behind me, I heard the unmistakable rustle of fabric, like someone shifting in their seat. I turned so fast I nearly lost my balance. Nothing. The row was still empty. I backed away, keeping my eyes on the seat. The plane's lights flickered briefly. A child in one of the occupied rows whimpered in her sleep. Trying to shake off my unease, I returned to the galley where my coworker Lisa was making coffee. "You okay?" she asked, noting my expression. I hesitated, then told her about the tray table and the call button. Lisa's face went pale. "Which row?" she asked quietly. I told her. She set the coffee pot down with a shaking hand. "That's the row," she whispered. "The row," she nodded. "A few months ago, a passenger died on a flight. Heart attack. He was alone, and he was in that row." The air around me suddenly felt much colder. I avoided the back of the plane for the rest of the flight. I didn't care if 100 tray tables were down or if every call button was pressed. I wasn't going back there. When we landed, I stayed behind as passengers disembarked. Just before I turned to leave, I risked one last glance at the back row. The tray table was down again, and the seatbelt, previously untouched, was now fastened tightly. I stood frozen, staring at that buckled seatbelt. My breath felt heavy in my chest. The cabin was empty now, just me and Lisa finishing our final walkthrough before disembarking. I could hear her footsteps moving toward the exit, but I couldn't move. "Lisa," I called, my voice quieter than I intended. She turned, saw where I was looking, and sighed. "Just leave it," she murmured, her voice tense. "Let's go." But I couldn't. Something about that seatbelt, about the way it was fastened, felt intentional. Slowly, almost against my better judgment, I stepped toward the row. My fingers trembled as I reached down to unbuckle the belt. As soon as I touched the metal clasp, an icy jolt shot up my arm. I gasped, yanking my hand back. The seat was freezing. A sudden knocking sound echoed through the empty cabin. It was coming from one of the overhead compartments, the one directly above the row. Lisa let out a sharp breath. "Nope," she muttered, grabbing my wrist. "We'll leave it." "No." I let her pull me toward the exit, my heart hammering. As we descended the jet bridge, I turned back one last time. The plane was dark now, empty, but just before I lost sight of the cabin, I saw something in that row. A shadow, a human shape sitting there, motionless. The last thing I saw before we turned the corner was the faint red glow of the call button, blinking. We filed an incident report, mechanical malfunctions, unexplained disturbances, but it was brushed off as a glitch. Airlines don't like ghost stories. But Lisa and I never worked another red eye on that aircraft again. I tried to forget about it. Really, I did. I chalked it up to exhaustion, a weird electrical malfunction, maybe some misplaced anxiety over covering a shift I hadn't planned on working. But deep down, I knew something was on that plane. Someone. I avoided flights that used the aircraft whenever I could. It wasn't always easy, but I swapped schedules, made excuses, even pulled a sick day once when I saw that tail number on my roster. Lisa did the same. Then, one night, about 3 months later, I ran into a newer flight attendant in the break room. Her name was Marisol, fresh out of training, still full of energy. We got to talking, and eventually she asked, "Hey, you ever work on tail 487? The number sent a cold shiver through me. I hesitated. "Yep." "Why?" She leaned in, lowering her voice. "Weirdest thing happened last night on a red-eye. Empty flight, maybe 20 passengers. I was doing the final walkthrough before landing, and she glanced around as if making sure we were alone. A seatbelt was fastened in an empty row. My stomach twisted. She kept going. I thought, oh, maybe turbulence knocked it in place, but when I tried to unbuckle it, it was ice cold. I swallowed. Row 24. Marisol's eyes widened. Yes, how did you know? I didn't answer. Instead, I asked, did you hear knocking? Now she looked genuinely scared. Oh my god, she whispered. From the overhead bin, we stared at each other, unspoken understanding passing between us. I thought about telling her the rest, about the call button, the shadow, about the way Lisa, and I swore never to step near that row again. But before I could, my radio crackled. The crew assignment board had posted my next flight, tail 487, red eye. I tried to switch shifts. No luck. I'd even told Schedule 8 I had food poisoning. They didn't buy it. Short-staffed, they said I had to go, so I did. I boarded the plane early, hoping to shake the nerves before passengers arrived. It looked the same, clean, orderly, just another aircraft, but I could feel it, that weight in the air, pressing against my skin. I forced myself to walk the length of the cabin, counting rows under my breath. 21, 22, 23. There it was, row 24. I hesitated, then glanced at the seat. The belt was unfastened, the tray table was up, everything looked normal. I let out a shaky breath. Maybe this was just paranoia. Maybe the overhead compartment clicked open. I spun around. The latch had come undone. The bin above row 24 was slightly ajar, and inside, pressed against the darkness, was a single handprint. Not dusty, not smudged, fresh. I backed away so fast I nearly tripped. The cockpit door swung open, and the captain, an older guy, years in the industry, stepped out. He frowned when he saw my face. You okay? He asked. I pointed to the overhead bin, my voice barely a whisper. Do you ever hear knocking back here? His expression didn't change, but after a long pause, he sighed, and then he said something that made my blood run cold. Yep, a pause. We all do. That was my last flight on 487. I don't know what happened to the man who died in that row. I don't know why he's still there, or what he wants, or why he won't leave. But I do know one thing. A few weeks later, I checked the flight logs out of curiosity. Tail 487 was still in rotation. I didn't step foot on tail 487 again after that last flight. Every time I saw it on a roster, I traded shifts. If I had to work it, I called in sick. I didn't care about the hit to my paycheck. It wasn't worth it. But avoiding something doesn't make it disappear, and sometimes it finds you anyway. Months passed, and I moved on. I even switched bases, thinking some distance would help, and for a while it did, until one night I was deadheading, riding as a non-working crew member to my next assignment. The flight was full, so they stuck me in the last available seat, row 24. I felt sick the second I saw the number, but it wasn't 487. I told myself, just another aircraft, another flight. I could handle it. The sit next to me was update, at least it was supposed to be. Halfway through the flight, I felt something. It started as a shift in the air, a sudden chill creeping along my skin. Then the distinct feeling of movement, like someone had just sat down beside me. The armrest pressed down slightly, like weight had settled on it. I didn't turn my head. I couldn't. My hands gripped my knees, my breath shallow. Then the tray table unlatched. Slowly, smoothly, I squeezed my eyes shut. This wasn't happening. Not here. Not on a different plane. But then I felt it. A soft exhale, so close it brushed my ear. A voice. Hello, why won't you sit with me? I snapped my head to the side. The seat was empty, but the seatbelt was buckled tightly. I hit the call button so fast I nearly jammed my finger. When the flight attendant arrived, I could barely get the words out. Can I move seats? She frowned. I'm sorry, we're completely full. I looked around. Every seat was occupied, except mine, and the one beside me. I didn't move for the rest of the flight. I didn't touch the tray table, didn't breathe too hard, didn't blink too long, and as we descended, the call button dinged. That might the seat beside me. When we landed, I was the first off the plane. I didn't stop moving until I was outside the terminal, under the harsh glow of fluorescent lights, gulping in fresh air. But just before I got into my rideshare, I checked my phone. I don't know why. Maybe I just needed proof that I was back in the real world. But there was a notification from an unknown number, a single message. You sat with me. I never flew again. This happened about 5 years ago when I was in college. My university had a small but popular ice rink, and every winter, students and locals would come to skate under the string lights that hung from the ceiling. It wasn't anything fancy, but it had a charm to it, the way the old wooden benches creaked, the faint scent of hot cocoa from the concession stand, the way the ice reflected the overhead lights in eerie, elongated shapes. I went there a lot, usually at odd hours when it was less crowded. I wasn't great at skating, but I liked the quiet. One night, I went later than usual, just an hour before closing. The place was nearly empty except for a couple of teenagers at one end, an older man reading a newspaper near the rental counter, and a lone figure gliding across the ice. At first, I didn't think much of him. He moved slowly, almost lazily, tracing long, deliberate loops around the rink. He wasn't dressed for skating, no gloves, no hat, just dark jeans and a heavy coat. I assumed he was a beginner, but something about the way he moved was rugged. His posture was stiff, like he wasn't used to his own body. Every time he passed under a light, I got a better look at his face. It was blank, not focused, not relaxed, just empty, like a mannequin someone had left on skates. Still, I ignored him. Maybe he was just lost and caught. I stepped onto the ice and started skating, keeping to myself. Every now and then, I'd glance up and see him, still moving in slow, deliberate loops. Then I noticed something. Every time I turned, he had adjusted his course. At first, it was subtle, just a shift in direction, a slight angle that lined him up with me. But after a few minutes, it was obvious he was matching my movements. If I sped up, he did too. If I stopped, he drifted to a halt. I tried to shake it off. Maybe it was just a coincidence. Then he broke the pattern. Instead of continuing his slow, aimless skating, he turned abruptly and started gliding straight toward me. I froze. Something about the way he moved made my stomach twist. He wasn't looking at me, not really. His head was tilted slightly downward, his face still blank, but his feet never faltered. There was no hesitation in his movements. I did the only thing I could think of. I skated away. I made a wide, fast loop around the rink, but when I looked back, he was still coming, his pace steady, not rushing, not slowing down, just moving forward like he had all the time in the world. I skated faster, heart pounding. The teenagers had left, and the man at the rental counter was gone. It was just me and him. I risked another glance behind me, and he wasn't there. For a moment, I thought maybe I had imagined it, that my brain had turned some poor stranger into a threat. Then I felt the ice shift, a wave behind me, close. I whipped around just in time to see him stopping inches away. Too close. His breath fogged in the cold air. His face was even more unsettling up close, uncanny, like a wax figure that had melted just a little around the edges. "You almost fell," he said. His voice was flat, like he wasn't used to speaking. I backed away, gripping the rink's edge, and then, just as subtly as he had come toward me, he turned and started skating away as if nothing had happened. I didn't stay to find out more. I clambered off the ice, yanked off my skates, and bolted out of the building without looking back. I never saw him again. I wish I could say that was the end of it, that I went home, shook it off, and never thought about it again. But that wasn't how it happened. For days afterward, I felt, it was the kind of unease that sticks with you like an itch under your skin. I tried telling myself I had overreacted, that he was just some awkward guy who didn't realize how creepy he seemed. But the feeling wouldn't go away, and then things got weirder. A week after the ice rink incident, I was walking back to my dorm late at night after a study session in the library. It had snowed earlier, so everything was blanketed in white, the campus sidewalks mostly empty. My dorm wasn't far, just a 10-minute walk past the student union and across the quad. I was halfway there when I noticed something strange. There were footprints in the snow ahead of me, leading down the same path I was taking. They weren't odd on their own, but something about them made my stomach twist. They were deep, too deep, like whoever had made them was heavier than they should be, and the spacing between them was off, perfectly measured, each step an exact distance apart. I stopped walking, my breath curling in the air. The footprints stretched ahead, disappearing around a corner. I glanced behind me. No one else was around. A horrible thought crawled into my head. What if he had been waiting for me to leave the rink that night? What if he had followed me home? I pulled out my phone and forced myself to keep walking, trying not to panic. But the closer I got to the turn in the path, the stronger the feeling of being watched became. When I finally rounded the corner, my pulse spiked. There was no one there. But the footprints, they stopped, just stopped. Not like someone had turned around. Not like they had stepped off the path. Just ended in the middle of the sidewalk. I stared at them, my breath coming faster now. I looked around, expecting to see someone hiding in the trees, in the shadows, but the campus was quiet. They only sound the distant hum of a snowplow. I didn't run. I should have. But something about the way the footprints just stopped held me there, like I was trying to make sense of something that refused to be understood. Then, in the heavy silence, I heard something behind me. A single scrape of movement on the snow. I spun around, and there was nothing. No one. But I swear I felt something there. Close. Too close. I didn't wait any longer. I sprinted the rest of the way to my dorm, slamming the door behind me, my heart hammering so hard I could barely breathe. I didn't go back to the ice rink. I started taking different routes home, always making sure I wasn't being followed. And eventually, the feeling faded. But sometimes, when I'm outside on a quiet winter night, when the air is still and the snow absorbs every sound, I think about those footprints. I tried to put it behind me. I really did. Weeks passed, and I forced myself to believe that nothing had happened, that my mind had just twisted an awkward encounter into something sinister, that the footprints had been a coincidence, that the feeling of being watched was just paranoia. And for a while, it worked until I saw him again. It was late February, one of those weird nights where winter was starting to give way to spring, but the cold still clung stubbornly to the air. The campus was quieter than usual, most people tucked away in their dorms, avoiding the icy slush that coated the sidewalks. I was heading back from a late night coffee run with a friend, and we had just parted ways near my building. The second she was out of sight, that same awful feeling washed over me. That feeling of being watched. I turned slowly, and there he was. Not close, not lurking in the shadows, just standing at the far end of the sidewalk, completely still. The man from the rake, same dark jeans, same heavy coat, same blank, unreadable face. But this time, he wasn't moving, he wasn't skating, wasn't following me in slow, measured steps. He was just standing there, watching. I don't know how long I stared. Then, just like before, he started walking. Not fast, not slow, just a steady, deliberate pace, straight toward me. I forced my legs to move, heart hammering as I fumbled with my keys and practically threw myself inside the dorm. The door slammed shut behind me, the heavy lock clicking into place. I turned to the window, and he was still there, standing just outside, looking up, not moving, not blinking. I yanked the blind shut, backing away from the window. My breath came in shallow, uneven gasps. I don't know how long I sat there, curled up in my desk chair, my phone clutched in my hands. I thought about calling someone, campus security, a friend, anyone, but what would I even say? That some guy I barely knew was creeping me out, that I had a bad feeling. Eventually, exhaustion won out. I crawled into bed, my body too drained to fight off sleep. I woke up around 3 a.m. The room was dark, the only light coming from the glow of my laptop charger. My mouth was dry, my limbs heavy with sleep. I almost rolled over, ready to pass out again. Then I heard it, a sound, soft, deliberate, a scraping noise. My blood turned to ice. It was coming from the window. I lay there, frozen, every nerve in my body screaming at me to not look, but I had to. I turned my head, and I saw it. Not him, not his face, just his fingers. Long, pale fingers pressed against the glass. Slowly, they dragged downward, leaving faint streaks against the window pane. I couldn't breathe, couldn't move. Then, they disappeared. I waited, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might stop. Seconds passed, then a minute, then two. Nothing. I reached for my phone, hands trembling, and dialed the campus security number with numb fingers. When they arrived 10 minutes later, the man was gone. No footprints, no sign that anyone had been there at all. But when they checked the security cameras, they found something. At 2:53 a.m., the camera outside my dorm caught a blurry figure approaching the building. He didn't stop, didn't hesitate. He walked right up to my window and just stood there, watching. For almost an hour, I moved out of that dorm 2 months later. I never saw him again, but sometimes when I pass an empty ice rink late at night, I swear, for just a second, I see someone gliding, slow and deliberate, across the ice, and I don't stop to watch. I work at a small, independent bookstore in a quiet part of town. It's one of those cozy places with creaky wooden floors, overstuffed armchairs, and the faint scent of old paper that lingers in the air. We're open late, mostly for the university students who stop by to pick up last-minute readings or just loiter in the philosophy section, pretending to be deep. One night, about an hour before closing, I was restocking the bargain shelf when I noticed an unfamiliar book sitting on the returns cart. It wasn't one of ours. Our store specializes in modern fiction, philosophy, and rare editions, but this book looked ancient. The cover was dark, almost blackened, with no title or author. The pages were yellowed and rough, like they'd been handmade. No barcode, no publishers in print, nothing. Curious, I flipped it open. The first page was blank, so was the second. I fanned through the entire thing, and every single page was empty except for the very last one. There, in delicate, spidery handwriting, was a date. Tomorrow's date. I frowned, flipping back through the rest of the book, running my fingers over the pages. They felt old, but nothing was written. It wasn't a diary, wasn't an art book, wasn't anything. Just an empty book with a single, ominous date at the end. I took it to the counter, intending to show my coworker, Mia, but when I looked up, she wasn't there. Strange. She had just been shelving in the poetry section. The store was small. There weren't many places to disappear to. I called. Silent. I checked the back room. Empty. The bathroom. The door was wide open, light off. She wasn't outside having a smoke, and she hadn't left. Her bag and jacket were still behind the counter. I pulled out my my phone to text her, but my screen wouldn't turn on, just black. I pressed the power button, nothing. A low, anxious hum started in my chest. That's when I heard it, a soft rustling, like paper shifting against itself. I turned, and every book on the nearest shelf was wrong. They were all identical, the same black cover, the same blank pages, the same date. A tremor crawled up my spine. My brain scrambled for logic, maybe a prank, a dream, some kind of elaborate marketing stunt. Then the lights flickered, and the door chime jingled, but no one had come in, no one had left. I grabbed the nearest book, heart pounding, and flipped to the last page. The date had changed. Now it said today. The rustling grew louder, pages flipping on their own, filling the store with a dry, whispering sound. The bookshelves stretched taller, the walls pressing in. My breath hitched. Then I heard Mia's voice, faint, from somewhere deep inside the store, or maybe from the pages. I ran. I didn't close up, didn't grab my things, just ran into the night, the book still clutched in my hand. When I finally stopped, gasping for breath under a street lamp, I dared to look again. The book was gone, and the next morning, when I returned to work, Mia was there behind the counter, smiling like nothing had happened. But she didn't remember me, didn't remember working the night before, didn't remember ever meeting me. And behind her, the shelves were back to normal, except for one book, tucked neatly between the others. Black cover, no title. I stood frozen, staring at the book on the shelf. The black cover, the name was Spy, and it shouldn't have been there. I had run out with it, hadn't I? And yet, there it was, sitting perfectly among the others, as if it had always belonged. Leah's voice snapped me out of my daze. "Fade, okay?" she asked, tilting her head. Her expression was polite, but unfamiliar, like she wasn't really saying me. I swallowed hard. "Yeah, just didn't sleep well." She nodded and turned back to organizing receipts, humming a tune I didn't recognize. Everything about her seemed normal, but she wasn't. She looked the same, sounded the same, but something was the same. Her usual sarcastic quips, the way she'd always make some joke about quitting when the coffee machine broke. Her way of flipping customers' ridiculous requests into something funny gone. It was like someone had rewritten her. I glanced back at the shelf. The book was gone. My pulse thudded. I stepped closer, running my fingers along the spines. Fiction, nonfiction, philosophy, all normal. But I knew what I had seen. I forced myself to go through the motions of the shift. Stocked books, rang up customers, nodded at me as small talk. But the whole time, my mind was racy. Something had happened last night. Something had rewritten reality, and I wasn't supposed to remember. That night, I didn't go straight home. I stayed outside the bookstore, watching through the window. Leah locked up as usual, flicked off the lights, and left. Nothing strange. No eerie shadows, no flickering lights, no black covered books materializing on the shelves. Still, I waited. The street was empty, the neon open late sign humming softly as it cooled down. I exhaled, feeling stupid. Then, just as I turned to leave, the store lights flickered back on. A small, golden glow deep inside. Someone was in there. I moved to the window, pressing close. At first, I saw nothing, just rows of shelves, the war rug near the register, the empty reading nook in the back. But then, from behind one of the shelves, a figure stepped into view. Leah, or something that looked like Mia. She stood perfectly still in the aisle, staring straight ahead. Her posture was stiff, unnatural, and then, without moving her mouth, her voice filled the space between us. "You need to stop looking." The words pressed against my skull like they had been spoken inside my head. I stumbled back from the glass. Leah didn't move. She just stood there, staring blankly. Then, slowly, her body started glitching. I don't know how else to describe it. 1 second, she was solid. The next, her outline shimmered, vibrating like a distorted image on an old screen. Her limbs twitched in jagged, unnatural motions. And then, just for a second, her face changed. Not into something monstrous, not into something with rows of teeth or hollow eyes. It changed into mine. I ran. I don't remember unlocking my apartment door or throwing myself inside. All I remember is shaking as I locked every bolt behind me. My phone, still dead, lay useless on my coffee table. My reflection in the dark TV screen looked distorted, wrong. And then something clicked. The book. I hadn't opened it last night. Not all the way. I had seen the date, but I hadn't read what else might have been written. With a sick feeling in my gut, I knew what I had to do. I had to go back. I didn't sleep that night. Even with every light on, every lock bolted, I could feel something watching. The air in my apartment felt dense, like the weight of 100 unseen eyes pressed against my skin. My phone wouldn't turn on no matter how many times I tried. Every reflective surface felt off, like if I looked too long, I'd see something looking back that wasn't me. But the worst part was the whispering, soft and faint, coming from the edges of the silence. I couldn't make out words, just the dry sound of pages turning. I had to go back. The bookstore was dark when I arrived before dawn. The open late sign still flickered faintly, even though it should have been off. The door was locked, but as soon as I touched the handle, it clicked open on its own. Inside, everything was wrong. The layout was slightly off. Shelves were just a few inches out of place. The counter seemed longer than it should have been, and the back reading nook stretched too far into the darkness. The warm scent of books was gone, replaced by a dry, papery staleness like air that hadn't moved in years. In there, on the center display table, was the book, black cover, new title. Waited, I didn't want to touch it. Every nerve in my body screamed at me to run, but I had come back for a reason. I had to turn the last page. Hands shaking, I opened it. The first page was still blank. The second, too. I flipped through, faster and faster, my breath coming quick as my fingers rasped against the rough paper. And then words, not just a date anymore. A message, a warning that you are not real. The air in the store collapsed. A deafening silence swallowed everything. The shelves stretched impossibly tall, disappearing into darkness. The ceiling was gone. The wells weren't wells anymore, just endless blackness, filled with the dry, whispering sound of unseen pages turning. And then I heard myself speak, but I hadn't opened my mouth. You shouldn't have come back. I turned. Mia was standing there, or something that looked like Mia. Her face was my face again, her features shifting, flickering between hers and mine like a distorted reflection. Her limbs moved in sharp, unnatural motions, like something wearing a human shape but not understanding how to use it. I tried to step back. I couldn't move. The book in my hands wouldn't let me go. And then, as the whispering grew deafening, I forced my eyes down to the final sentence on the page. Close the book, or become the story. My fingers clenched. Mia, the thing wearing Mia's face, took a step closer. My own face grinned at me. I slammed the book shut. I woke up to the sound of a door chiming. Morning light streamed through the bookstore windows. Customers browsed the shelves. The air smelled of paper and ink again. Everything was normal, except for one thing. Mia wasn't behind the counter. I was, and I couldn't remember how I got there. I turned, looking toward the center display table. The book was gone. Alright, but that's it. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, make sure to subscribe to my channel, like this video, and comment something down below. But as always,
Have a nice day.